This is the webinar with the amazing Susie Becher. Um, she's a member of the Policy Working Group, Israelis, and this webinar is on the topic of Israelis seeking two-state solution through international engagement. So I'm going to just quickly introduce Susie and then hand over to her. She's the communications director for the Policy Working Group, which is a team of Israeli analysts, academics, human rights defenders, and former diplomats advocating internationally for a two-state solution. Some of you will remember we've had Alon Liel, retired ambassador, and also the entire retired quite a few of you have actually spoken in our different webinars.
Mhm.
So it's been fascinating every single time. You are also a founding member of All Its Citizens, an Arab Jewish political party established in 2022 to promote equal rights for all citizens of Israel. And you are the managing editor of the Palestine-Israel Journal, which is a quarterly publication offering perspectives from both sides on the key issues. And you had served in the Meretz Party. That is a very, very brief bio because you've done so much more, some of which I'm sure you'll touch on. As always, I'll just say that speakers are speaking on their own behalf, and we will be having a Q&A after Susie finishes her presentation. So please do pop any questions you might have in the chat box. And Susie's going to be addressing a bunch of these key issues, but also telling us about a recent trip of the Policy Working Group over to the UK, where you met with a bunch of politicians, parliamentarians, a bunch of different organizations working on this issue. So we look forward to hearing all about it, and I will hand over to you now.
Thanks. So thanks, Diane, and thanks to the Britain-Palestine Project for inviting me. And of course, thank you to all of you who are spending time listening to me today. I guess although Diane introduced me, I'll just give a little more background about myself. So I'm originally from Canada, which you can probably tell by my accent, but I've been living in Israel now for slightly over 50 years. I worked for over 30 years at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv doing open source collection. So my background is in open source, editing analysis, connecting dots based on what's appearing in the media. And I'm also on the steering committee of Zulat, which is a human rights think and do think and do tank, yes, which is run by Zahava Galon, the former chair of the Meretz Party. I'm sure many of you have heard of her. And just the last thing, if you're interested, I write a blog in the Times of Israel on the conflict on Israel and Palestine, also about our current government. It's my catharsis writing this blog, so you can look me up in the Times of Israel. But I'm here wearing my hat as the communications director of the Policy Working Group, the PWG, so I'll tell you a bit more about that. The PWG actually began as the political committee of the Peace NGO Forum, which was established in 2005 under Ron Pudak. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He was one of the primary architects of the Oslo Accords. And after Ron passed away an untimely death, I believe it was in 2014 or 2015, the Peace NGO Forum went through a couple of different interim chairs, and its direction started to change somewhat, not in a bad way, but it was becoming more inclusive. And the members of the political committee had experienced a lot of freedom in their views and what they were advocating for, and they had sort of dragged the Peace NGO Forum somewhat to the left, and under the new chairs, it was moving more toward the center, as I said, with the goal of being more inclusive, which is fine. But we weren't so happy with being restricted by that at the time. Don't forget, this is, I'm talking a little more than a decade ago. There were arguments about whether or not to use the term occupation, and we just felt that we wanted to be free of those restrictions. And so we broke away and we founded the Policy Working Group, which is chaired by former Ambassador Ilan Baruch. It's made up of approximately 30 people. All of us are volunteers. Nobody gets paid. And we're not a registered NGO, which on the one hand is somewhat restrictive because there are certain things that we don't get invited to or can't participate in because we're not registered. But on the other hand, it gives us absolute freedom to say whatever we want to say. So we like to think of ourselves as lean and mean. We're made up of several former ambassadors, former members of Knesset, senior analysts, journalists, and human rights defenders. Some of our members they're committed to our cause, but they work more behind the scenes because, like most of the Israeli left, and you can tell this also from my bio, we wear various different hats, and so in order to avoid conflicts, they aren't public in their PWG participation, but they're very committed to what we do. And our goal, as Diana said, is achieving international engagement in order to end the conflict, achieve a resolution based on the two-state solution. And what we're looking for is achieving the two-state solution and not just negotiating forevermore. We have come to the conclusion, actually many years ago, and the more time that passes, the more it unfortunately proves to be the case, that the two sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, just cannot do it on their own. They need international engagement. On one side at the moment, there's no willingness. On the other side, has no ability. And it's not only about guiding the sides, like bringing them together, but there's also an international interest in resolving this conflict, which we saw very clearly after the events of October 7th, how things were the fighting was expanding, the number of fronts was opening, Iran started coming in, the whole Western world was involved in protecting Israel from the first Iranian strike. And as we've seen in the case of Syria, for example, whenever there's a conflict, we get to the issue of illegal immigration, refugees flooding Europe. And so there's definitely a European interest and a global interest in seeing a resolution of this conflict. We do have partnerships with some Palestinian organizations. We work with Pax Christi in Germany once a year. We make a trip. We do an advocacy trip where we go to Berlin. We have meetings at the Bundestag and with government officials and with think tanks, the same kind of thing that we were doing in London. Ilan and one of our Palestinian partners, they go once a year to Belgium. They do advocacy in Brussels, and we have ad hoc trips here and there where we meet with like-minded people. We kind of get questioned about that approach, like, are we preaching to the choir? And first of all, we hold public events. So, and of course, they're open to whoever wants to come. So it's not restricted only to people who see things the way that we do. But generally, the people that turn up are people who are interested in seeing a resolution of the conflict, and therefore they're kind of leaning the way that we do. And we think that it's very important in terms of networking and strengthening the message and giving people overseas, bolstering their positions by seeing Israelis who are also committed to two states, to Palestinian human rights, because we feel that it's in the interests of Israel. We're not working against Israel's interests. We actually think that peace and the two-state solution is the way to secure the interests of both people for generations to come. Some of the things that we've done are biggest success, I suppose, was actually a decade ago. The ambassadors in the group wrote a letter to the Brazilian Foreign Ministry to oppose the appointment of Dani Dayan, a settlement leader, as Israel's ambassador to Brazil. And in fact, Brazil did reject Dani Dayan. Unfortunately, he ended up at the UN instead. So it's not that we were able to stop him from having a platform, but at least there was this symbolic gesture made and a message given about the illegality of settlements and about the not accepting, not legitimizing the people who live in the settlements. Just before the Abraham Accords, there was a letter published in an Israeli paper by the UAE ambassador to Washington, who was speaking against annexation and how Israel could have ties with the Gulf states if it took a different course. And our ambassadors, again, they wrote a letter in response to him, and that letter was published in a Gulf newspaper. So we think it's one of the first time that former Israeli foreign ministry officials have had their opinions, an opinion piece posted published in a Gulf paper. We have written letters to the German Bundestag when it was debating whether or not to outlaw BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Our stand on that, the PWG does not support the practice. We don't believe at the moment in that trilogy of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the state of Israel. The territories is a bit different. I'll talk a bit more about that, but not against the state of Israel. However, we very much defend BDS as a legitimate practice. It's a non-violent position, and people can be, we don't consider it anti-Semitic if you take a position against the policies of the state of Israel, or if you don't believe in the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. I don't accept that view. Of course, the PWG does support the right of the Jewish people to self-determination, but we do not consider it anti-Semitic or illegitimate to have that opinion. And so that was the content of the message that we sent to the Bundestag at the time. We've written to the Irish government and parliament to support their move to have a trade ban on settlement products. We've written to EU leaders on their need to go beyond rhetoric on the issue of Israeli violations of international law and actually take action in order to drive the message home, because years of saying that Israel is violating international law have not accomplished very much in terms of ending the occupation. And so those are some of the areas in which we've worked. For years, we've been giving, long before October 7th, we've been giving the message that without a diplomatic process, the Palestinians are going to be left with no options except violence. I say this as in no way whatsoever defending anything that happened on October 7th. Okay, I want to be absolutely clear about it. I believe Hamas is a terrorist organization, and the attacks of October 7th were terror attacks. However, there has been no diplomatic process since 2014, when the Secretary Kerry's mission failed. And every non-violent move that the Palestinians have tried to take, such as the BDS movement, appeals to the ICC, appeals to the UN, appeals to the ICC, of course, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. All of these moves they've been castigated for taking these moves as either being anti-Semitic or taking unilateral steps that are against the Oslo Accords or engaging in lawfare. In other words, this is a form of legal terrorism, and really, Israel did not accept any form of protest on the part of the Palestinians. And what we saw was not that everybody engaged in the violence of October 7th, but there's no questioning that it did put the Palestinian issue back on the international agenda. And Israel has some of the responsibility for the fact that that's what happened. The PWG has supported recognition of the state of Palestine for years. We believe that it's needed because it would give the Palestinians from the Irish conflict, we adopted the term parity of esteem. In other words, it would raise the level of the Palestinian government to that of the Israeli government, so that when they entered the negotiations room, they would be more or less on the same standing. Of course, Israel would remains much more powerful, but in terms of their diplomatic standing, they would be on the same level rather than one government dealing with one territory or autonomy or authority or vague entity. But at this point, given the advances that have been made in the past few months in the areas of recognition, what we're pushing for is expanding that additional countries should recognize the state of Palestine, and I don't know if more important, but certainly equally important, that it not just be a symbolic gesture, but that it actually have impact. So those were the main themes of our tour in London. This was we were there about 2 weeks ago. It's our third trip. So we were building on connections that we had from the past, as well as new people that we met. As I've said earlier about this networking within like-minded people, it actually helps you. We learn from them, they learn from us, and it does give more strength to the progressive camp that wants to see a resolution of the conflict now. The timing of this particular visit was actually critical because we had just seen this wave of recognitions that happened in September, followed by the UN endorsement of the New York Declaration. For those of you who don't know, when they talk about, it's even mentioned in the Trump plan, the French-Saudi proposal, what began as French-Saudi collaboration on getting more states to recognize the state of Palestine and move toward implementation of the two-state solution. This developed, they got more states on board. The Arab League is on board. There are many Muslim countries that are on board, and the EU. And this developed into what became the New York Declaration on Implementation of the Two-State Solution, which is really a very detailed plan for how to sew this thing up, get it done. It has a sense of urgency to it. It talks about timelines. It talks about immediate steps. It talks about steps on the part of both parties. It talks about steps that need to be taken by the international community. So it's a very detailed and positive plan, in my view, the most positive thing that we've seen since October 7th. And this New York Declaration was endorsed by the UN in, I believe it was the beginning of October, although it was not endorsed by the United States. The United States rejected it, just as President Trump has been bad-mouthing all the recognitions and saying that the countries doing it are making a mistake. but that was like sort of where we were at the beginning of October, and as we were planning our trip. So there was the UN endorsement of the New York Declaration, and the next thing that happened was the Trump 20-point plan. But before I go into that, I will just give you a few more details about who we actually met with while we were in London. So we were fortunate to have meetings with the Foreign Office. We met with members of the Commons and the House of Lords, both Labour and opposition. But as I said earlier, we don't meet with hardcore opposition. We don't feel that there's any point in sitting and having a dialogue of the deaf. We look more for people who are either already where we're at and we can partner with them, or people who are kind of, wavering, and we feel that we can present arguments that may bring them around to our point of view. We had events that were organized by the All-Party Parliamentary Group. We addressed the Labor Middle East Council. They had an event for us. And in addition, we met with think tanks and Middle East analysts and some security experts because of the way that the Trump plan is developing. And again, I will spend plenty of time on the Trump plan because it's the bane of my existence at the moment. We had some contact with the media, which was great. And our takeaways are, like, from our meetings with government and parliamentarians, we got the sense like most are pretty much in agreement with the positions that we were presenting. But of course, they're politicians, and so there are domestic considerations that come into play. And there's also, it's looking at the moment that, I mean, it's awful to say this, but it's kind of like, because there's a ceasefire. Again, I know it's not being upheld 100%, but there is a ceasefire in Gaza now. And so with only a dozen people being killed daily instead of hundreds, it looks like the Palestinian issue is kind of slipping off the radar again. At the moment, we're seeing Ukraine and Russia, getting more attention. And of course, for Europe, the Ukrainian issue is like right on your doorstep. So we have to contend with that, sort of compete for attention. Unfortunately, there are a lot of bad things going on in the world. So there is this tension of like, there's only so many resources and where you're going to put them. So we understand that. But of course, as I said earlier, we don't consider this a local issue or a regional issue. We really believe that it's a global issue, and that's what we were trying to convey to our interlocutors. Our meetings with civil society were fantastic. People were very grateful, and some of them quite surprised, actually, to hear Israelis speaking the way that we do. I think the impression today is that all Israelis have shifted to the right, and none of them are ready to consider that they're so deep in the trauma of October 7th that they can't see Palestinians as people who are entitled to rights, and they also, there's a general feeling that all the Palestinians are out to get us, okay? And here we were, Israelis, saying, not only do we not think that all the Palestinians are out to get us, we also partner with Palestinians, and we believe that the way to peace is through fulfilling the right to self-determination and the national aspirations of both people. So people were very grateful to hear those kind of voices coming from Israel. The way that we work, the policy working group, so on the big issues, we we generally work on consensus, but we don't all agree on some more tactical things. And everybody has, because we come from such different backgrounds, everybody has like a certain area that's their primary area of focus. So as I said, all of us, when we were in London, we were talking about the need to expand recognition, talk to other countries. Some of those that came up were Holland, Denmark. We talked about Italy. We talked about Germany, which is, of course, one of the hardest nuts to crack because of the Holocaust. But again, as I keep saying, we appear overseas as Israelis representing what we believe are the interests of the Israeli people as well as the Palestinian people. There's this discourse that has taken off. It was around before, but it's gotten even worse since October 7th, which is, are you pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli? And I'm really against that kind of thinking. I believe that I am both. Okay, I believe that peace will be good for both peoples. I believe that we can compromise on territory in the interests of peace. I believe in international law and in upholding international law, and I believe that serves not only the Palestinians but the Israelis as well, not only in terms of the conflict with the Palestinians, but also in terms of domestic policy. Human rights in Israel also need to be upheld, as does international law. Okay, so those were, and then, yes, in addition to expanding recognition, we talked about giving it meaning. I mean, we welcome the fact that so many countries have recognized Palestine. On our previous advocacy tour in the UK, that's what we were pushing for. And so, of course, we thanked your government for having taken the step. On the other hand, we keep warning, if it's not felt on the ground by the Palestinians, which is largely the case today, it's not going to move us toward the achievement of a peace agreement. The Palestinians need to see that it's paying off, that diplomacy pays off. And so we talked about various measures that could be taken in order to deepen and give more significance to recognition. As I said, we all sort of focus on different things. So there's a lot on the agenda at the moment after the release of the Trump plan. So Elon talked a lot about the demilitarization, demobilization, decommissioning. Different words are being thrown around, dealing with Hamas, and within that context, the significance of the Board of Peace, the International Stabilization Force, the CMCC, that's the Civil Military Coordination Committee, which is under the International Stabilization Force, all these bodies that are meant to oversee implementation of the ceasefire and oversee disarming Hamas. With our primary push there being for the need to take the Palestinian Authority into account in the running of all of these entities, that we have to bolster the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority and give the Palestinian people a say in what their future is going to be, which is totally lacking from the Trump plan. Alon has been working very hard on the release of Marwan Barghouti. For those of you who don't know, he was a former Fatah official. He led the Tanzim forces during the Second Intifada. As a result of that, he was captured, he was tried, and he's serving, I think, 5 life sentences in Israeli prison at the moment. There's always been a movement to release Marwan Barghouti. There are Palestinians. I don't want to speak in the name of all Palestinians. Of course, there's different views, but there are many who see him as the Palestinian Nelson Mandela. There are polls that show that if there were Palestinian elections and Marwan Barghouti ran, that he would take the lead. And he particularly came back into the headlines. Well, two things happened. One is, I don't remember, I think it's like 2 months ago or something. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir paid a visit to Marwan Barghouti, in which, in front of the cameras, he just humiliated him, treated him with utter disrespect. And just looking at Marwan Barghouti, you could see how his health has deteriorated. He's being denied his rights. He used to be allowed family visits. He's not allowed family visits anymore. His family reports that he gets beaten in prison. And there was, as part of the ceasefire in Gaza and the prisoner exchange that happened along with the release of the hostages, Israel released 250 Palestinian prisoners who they define as having blood on their hands. In other words, they were actively engaged or gave orders for terrorist attacks in which Israelis were killed. And they released 250 such prisoners. And of course, there were calls on the Palestinian side for Marwan Barghouti to be among them. Israel did not release Marwan Barghouti, not because he is serving the worst sentence of all the Palestinians. In fact, there were many prisoners who were released who had more serious convictions than Marwan had. But clearly because he's also a political figure, and there's a sense that if Marwan Barghouti was released, that it would help consolidate the political elements on the Palestinian side and bring about a stronger push for negotiations. And so the Israeli government, which has no interest in negotiating whatsoever with the Palestinians, of course, are very happy to negotiate with the Gulf states. So the Israelis aren't releasing him for that reason. They want to keep him in prison. And there are concerns that if he doesn't get out of prison soon, that actually his life may be in danger. And my primary focus, and I keep mentioning this and saying I'll go back to it in more detail, is President Trump and the independence of Europe, both the EU and the European countries that are not part of the EU, them taking an independent position on foreign policy issues in general. And although they have shown more guts when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, they have proven to be, in my opinion, extremely disappointing when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict. So President Trump, it's hard to find the words. I was also warned not to be too vitriolic in my description of President Trump. So let me say that he's a rather volatile personality. He is driven, and he himself says this, that he's driven by ego and by money. Okay, at the Knesset, he was talking about money. He was talking about all the rich people who were waiting for him in Sharm el-Sheikh and how they have more money in Sharm el-Sheikh at the moment than like all the people, all the rich people all over the world. When he was in Sharm el-Sheikh, he commented on the clothes of one of the Gulf sheikhs who was there. He makes, he says it quite clearly. He's interested in money. He's interested in the bottom line. He says, I'm not a politician. I am a deal maker. And because of that outlook, there's no ideology. There's no policy. We have seen him flip-flop on Zelensky, Putin, even now with this latest plan that he's come up with for peace between Ukraine and Russia. He's like flipping around. Apparently, he's also open to making some changes to the plan. I wonder what's going on behind the scenes on that. So, as I told you at the beginning, I worked for 30 years in open source collection. Watching my time here, I want to make sure that we have some time left for questions. But when I get going on the U.S. administration, I get quite worked up. So I spent 30 years working in open source collection, a large part of which is listening to what leaders say and looking for trends, like understanding the nuances when a new word is used and stuff. And there is no such thing. You cannot do open source analysis on anything said by President Trump, because even within the same speech, he can contradict himself. He appeared at the Knesset and he told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the leaders of the world look up to him, respect the way that he has handled the war, the accomplishments, what he has done in Gaza. And then in the same speech later on, he said, Bibi, it's good that you agreed to my plan because the leaders of the world were like really tired and they didn't want you to go on any longer. So even within the same speech, he contradicts himself. It's not just about the Middle East, it's a worldview. He started off by saying, the minute he took office, he was looking at Greenland and saying that, Greenland is good for U.S. national security and therefore he can take it. He says that he believes in peace through strength, which is the equivalent of might makes right. He believes in if you can take territory and you need it, go ahead. And this actually poses a danger to the future of what we call the rules-based order, which has existed since the end of World War II. Now it comes down to if you can make a case that you need this territory, no matter who it belongs to, you can take it. And we are very likely, even if he sort of modifies how much land he's planning to give to Russia, how much Ukrainian land, any Ukrainian land given to Russia, any land, I don't want to make it just about Ukraine and Russia, okay? International law says you cannot take territory by force. You cannot acquire territory by force. If you do, you have to give it back, period. And that is not the worldview of the President of the United States, and that has implications for the whole world. But getting back to the Middle East, the current government has, and this, it's been building through more than a decade of Netanyahu governments, but now we've seen it happening at a terrifying rate since October 7th, which is this notion of a government policy that agreements aren't worth the paper that they're written on and what you really need for security. Okay, if your security is strengthened, you have to hold on to territory. And therefore, although an agreement was signed with the government of Lebanon, Israel still holds 5 outposts in southern Lebanon, which it has no intention for the moment of withdrawing from, and who knows if they may not decide that they need to go in and take more. In addition to holding on to the Golan Heights since the war in 1967, after the Assad government fell, Israel went right in and took even more Syrian territory because, again, this government believes that that's the way to ensure Israeli security, And President Trump didn't tell them, no, that's a violation of international law, because he believes if you can take it, take it. And of course, we've seen it in the occupied territories. But in terms of Gaza, at the moment, the Trump plan even includes this notion of what's called the perimeter, which is that if the ceasefire is kept and all the stages are completed and Israel withdraws, until the place turns into the Lake Como region, Israel is entitled to keep what's called a perimeter, which is, I don't know, they haven't said exactly how much land it is yet, 700 meters, a kilometer, but going all around the territory of the Gaza Strip, which in essence is entrenching the occupation of Gaza. Now, just before, as I said, I talked about the New York Declaration and about Europe taking an independent stand and defying President Trump, defying the United States, let's not make it personal, the US administration, by going ahead with the New York Declaration. And then President Trump came up with a 20-point plan, which, I'm trying to speed up here, as a ceasefire plan, yeah, it got the hostages freed. It got Palestinian detainees who were kept under administrative detention were released. I'm not happy about the release of people with blood on their hands, but in the interest of bringing about a ceasefire, I support it. And primarily it stopped Israel from killing hundreds of Gazans on a daily basis. Okay, so as a ceasefire plan, great. But as a plan, as a peace plan, which President Trump is trying to sell it as, it has no mention whatsoever of the West Bank or East Jerusalem. It has the potential of this yellow line turning into a permanent division of the Gaza Strip into two. It further fragments the West Bank from East Jerusalem. It does not address any of the violence that's going on, settler violence in the West Bank. Of course, there's no concept of occupation in it. As I just said, in a way, this perimeter actually furthers occupation of Gaza. It sets some vague hoops for the PA to jump through in terms of achieving reforms, but the reforms aren't itemized. It's not clear what exactly the PA is expected to do and what the timeline is. Like, at what point will the PA be told, yes, you have completed everything on the list and you can now take over governance of Gaza? The reference to statehood that Israel got so upset about says the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway, okay, not for the establishment of a pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which is an aspiration of the Palestinian people, not a right. And it references, remember the deal of the century, the old Trump's first term, the Peace to Prosperity Plan, which said statehood, but actually talked about a fragmented Palestinian autonomy. That plan is referenced in the Trump peace plan. And we saw, I'm going to wrap up, don't worry, Diana, how the leaders of the Gulf countries, of the Arab world, and of Europe, President Macron, who was the force behind the French-Saudi initiative, Prime Minister Starmer, who had just recognized the state of Palestine, They all lined up at Sharm el-Sheikh and listened to this president who was talking about he has brought like peace that the world has not seen for centuries. He had this banner on top saying Peace 2025. And they all stood there and posed under this picture after having shook President Trump's hand. And my big concern, why am I going on and on and on about this? It's not a personal dislike for President Trump. My fear is that this 20-point plan, which reeks of colonialism, is going to leave the Palestinian people without diplomatic options, without political alternatives, and therefore we're going to see another round of violence. And I wish that Europe would stand up the way that it did in endorsing the New York Declaration, re-embrace that plan, and if anything, make the Trump ceasefire plan an appendix to the New York Declaration rather than the opposite. Because if the 20-point plan is our main reference, the title of the 20-point plan says resolving the Gaza conflict. So that's what it's about. It's about a ceasefire in Gaza, and it moves us, in my opinion, further away from achievement of the two-state solution. I'll stop there. Sorry I talked so long, Diana, but
No, that
here we
was
go.
fascinating. Thank you. I just want to clarify that I was not the one that told you not to be too vitriolic about Trump. I'm
Oh,
okay.
absolutely. No, 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 no.
I'm fine with it. You crack on.
Okay, good.
I thought it was funny that you said, well, funny and depressing that you said he's basically open source proof. It reminded me of an interview I did with a police officer who said that some serial killers are so textbook that they actually mess with the algorithm. And Trump sounds like he's the opposite. I just want to.
Yes, you cannot connect dots because they just don't. I mean, look at what he said about Mandadi 2 weeks ago. He was like the devil incarnate, and now he's sitting looking at him. Mandadi says genocide, and Trump is sitting there going,
I love the memes of him looking adoringly. I hope that someone one day looks at me like that. But
I do.
oh, bless you. I wanted to highlight some of the amazing people that have come along today because we have Arthur Goodman from Jews for Justice for Palestinians in the audience. We've got Georgie Brooks from the Guild of the St. John Eye Hospital, which, as you know, has hospitals in Jerusalem and Hebron, but also in Gaza. And I am going to take this opportunity to post a link in the chat box for their cookbook raffle because I think it ends today or tomorrow. But if you enter, you can win cookbooks that have been donated by a bunch of different chefs, including Palestinian chefs like Fadi Katan, who's got the amazing Akoop restaurant here in London, Bethlehem chef, and the money goes towards their efforts in Gaza. The hospital is shut at the moment, but they're running field hospitals, so they're doing phenomenal work. We've also got Avi Schleim, Professor Avi Schleim here, who we all know and love. And we've got the founders of the Britain-Palestine Project. The Spooners are both in attendance. Monica Spooner has written a book which has been out for a little while now, but I'm going to post a link to that too. It's called Why Didn't I Know? Britain's Legacy in Palestine. And it documents how they started on this journey, which led to you and I being here and everyone else listening to us. So I'm posting a link here. We've got lots of our trustees as well and lots of our friends of the Britain-Palestine Project. Those are people who donate any amount to us monthly, and I'll post a link in a moment as well. It gives you preview tickets or free or discounted tickets to our paid events, as well as sort of quarterly meetings with key people in our organization and sometimes guest experts. And it helps us with our funding to do our activities. We try to provide as much as we can for free because one of our missions is to spread awareness. But everything costs money these days. So anything you can do to support us would be amazing. It helps with our admin, it helps with our fundraising, it helps with our future planning. I mentioned we've got some of our trustees. I just want to say that we've got a webinar coming up. I posted it in the chat, but I'm going to do it again because it is with our chair, Andrew Whitley, our trustee, Sir Vincent Fien, who's former Consul General in Jerusalem, and our executive director, Dr. Brian Bravati, who some of you will know. And it is entitled Recognition Was the Beginning, Britain-Palestine Project Review of 2025 and Preview of 2026. So that will be on the 16th of December at 3 p.m. So please do come along to that if you can. We'll just be sort of summarizing the year for us as an organization, but also on this issue and talking a bit about what 2026 will bring. Sorry, that was just a little bit of housekeeping and some other stuff. We've got some questions now. Got one from Roy Morris. He says, how do you progress your views among the Israeli public?
How do we advance our views among the Israelis? It's very difficult. I was at another dialogue with Israelis and Palestinians, and we were thanked for taking the time to come overseas for this meeting at the cost of being away from our families. And I was telling them there's an additional cost that we pay for our activities, which is many of us are not supported by family and friends. Before I left for London, family and friends, some of them said to me, we really don't want to hear about what you're doing. We think that it's detrimental to the state of Israel. And I keep giving the message, which I've said to our audience as well. I believe what I do is good for Israel. And that's what I tell Israelis. I'm not working against the state. I live here. I haven't left. I'm not speaking to you from Toronto, okay, where I have lots of relatives who would be happy to take me in. I live in Israel. I have children in Israel. I have grandchildren in Israel. I have sisters in Israel. I'm not suicidal. I am pursuing what I believe is the best way to bring security for both people. Neither side is going to have a secure future unless there are two choices. Either we live side by side or one of us kills off the other. Because what's going on now, it's like, it's just back and forth. One time they have the upper hand, one time we do. Okay, obviously we're the stronger force, but something like October 7th, okay, was devastating. And I was here on October 7th. I experienced October 7th. My sisters and my friends don't have to tell me about it, or the Israeli leftists who have shifted to the right after October 7th, saying that their conclusion was that the Palestinians don't want peace. No, my conclusion, I even believe more than I did before, we have to end the occupation. That's the path, ending the occupation.
Thank you. We've got, sorry, I have to apologize because we won't get through all of the questions because there's been so many.
My fault. Sorry.
No. We never get a chance to go through all of them because we have always a very engaged and interested and interesting audience, and their questions reflect that. But I'm trying to touch on each of the topics that kind of have come up. You mentioned Marwan Barghouti. And some of the audience will know that there's discussions of a new death penalty law in Israel being introduced. This is a question from Kay Abbott. Is this death penalty law aimed at Marwan Barghouti? I've heard rumors that he's almost the poster boy for this new bill, and that they are talking about it being able to be applied retrospectively to cases.
Things are so bad. I mean, I really hope this bill doesn't go through, but even if it's not aimed at Barghouti, it's a horrible, horrible bill. First of all, apparently there is a death penalty on the books under some Israeli law. This is it's Ben Gvir showing his base that he can deliver. Okay, we're probably going, well, for sure we're going to elections within a year. They may be earlier, I hope so, although I don't have much hope for change. Ben Gvir is speaking to his base with it. I don't think that it's meant to target Barghouti in particular, but it's almost like what I said about Trump. Netanyahu sometimes surprises me. There are things that I say he'll never do that, and then he does it. I find it hard to believe that they would execute Barghouti, not because they're against it, but because of what it could set off. But I wouldn't put anything past them.
Thank you. We've got a question from Christina Holtgren, who says, thank you for this webinar, first of all. Where would the boundaries go in a two-state solution? How much of its illegally occupied territories would Israel have to withdraw from, hand back to the Palestinians?
Okay, so the standard, like the international community is more or less agreed on the 67 borders, and then territorial swaps that are negotiated between the two parties, which would account for moving the border so that some of the settlements and apparently most of the settlement population is very close to the border, so those would become part of the state of Israel. It's one way of addressing the settlement problem, and the Palestinian state would get an equal amount of territory. There's also negotiations on Jerusalem because east-west and the holy sites. My personal view, I don't care if it's 67 borders to the letter. If there is peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, if there's a free, independent, sovereign, contiguous, viable state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel, I don't care if I have to apply for a visa to go visit the Wailing Wall. But that's not you won't hear many people saying that. I'm not speaking on behalf of the PWG now. I'm saying that for myself. But the internationally accepted formula is 67 borders with agreed adjustments. Adjustments are agreed between the two sides.
And then I'm going to end with a final question based on one from Timothy Matar, one of our trustees. What do you think we here, and what do you think the British and the Europeans can do to sort of move Israel along to some sort of peaceful solution?
Okay, so as I said over and over, get out from under Trump's shadow. Okay, be independent, be true to yourselves, don't go along. I mean, Peace 2025, does Prime Minister Starmer really believe that the Trump plan will bring about peace by the end of December? So, be true to your government's own policies. I think it's very important to take steps to keep the occupation, or rather ending the occupation, on the international agenda. That is being lost. The focus is turning to Gaza because, of course, of the number of people dying there. So I understand, but the occupation is like the root of the problem. The West Bank, settlement expansion, annexation de jure might have been stopped, but annexation de facto is like going about on steroids, which doesn't mean that there cannot be a two-state solution, but it does mean that bringing it about may be bloodier if there are more and more people living in the occupied territories. So things such as I think the UK needs to follow through on the ICJ opinion on the occupation. I think you need to ban all trade with any entity operating beyond the Green Line, like no trade with the settlements or second or third generations of settler products. We used to talk about labeling. We're way past labeling. Make it clear by actions that the occupation needs to come to an end, and that there will be no security. And make it clear. Sorry, I know we're a little over time. I actually wrote an op-ed about this when Prime Minister Starmer, before he actually announced recognition, when he said he was going to do it, he said, unless Israel does X, Y, Z. And that painted recognition of the state of Palestine as a punitive measure against Israel. And I think it's very important, if you're interested in peace, when you present your views and what you're advocating for, you have to explain it's not about serving the Palestinian cause at the expense of the Israelis. We have a joint interest. We have joint objectives. We want security for both peoples.
Yeah, agreed. It was really a bizarre choice of words to sort of make it seem like that, like a punishment to Israel, rather than this is something that will benefit everyone in the region.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad we moved past that quickly. But I want to thank you, Susie, because you were fascinating. It's so interesting to hear your perspective, to know that there's same voices there, over there on all sides. And thank you so much for coming over and talking to all the people that you did over here in the UK. I want to thank everyone who came along and listened to us today. Like I said, the recording's going to go up on all of our website, YouTube, podcast platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So please do share with anyone you think might be interested. And Susie, one more time, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to the BPP.
Thank you. Bye.